Have you ever seen those videos of people playing games, doing extremely random inputs, then all of a sudden... Or maybe you've even seen stuff where they use a robot to play through the game and end up turning this normally functioning game into something completely different? Today, I'm gonna try my best to explain what's going on here, and how communities were able to put their heads together to come up with this ridiculous stuff you're seeing today. Something known as arbitrary code execution. The concept of arbitrary code execution, or ACE for short, is similar to how a hacker would break into a computer or system. They find a small bug in the program, or in this case, a bug in the game, and from there can manipulate the console by creating what is known as a payload, which allows them to do a whole host of things at their command, including even writing their own software. For a video game though, this is a lot different, as you usually don't have access to a keyboard to write your own code, but rather whatever controller comes with the system. As you'll see later, this did not stop talented people from coming up with workarounds. For example, let's look at 1990's Super Mario World for the Super Nintendo. It wouldn't be super obvious how you'd go about doing crazy stuff off the bat, but some weird glitches were found over time to make this a reality. In January 2009, YouTube Let's Player raocow accidentally performed a glitch while playing a modded version of Mario World, in which Yoshi seemingly eats an invisible object. Just 5 months later in June, tool-assisted speedrunner ISM would find a new glitch known as item swap, where when Yoshi eats an edible object the moment it despawns, some other available object will take its place, even if you're not supposed to eat it. This item swap glitch would lay the foundation for the other finds that would soon come. September 2010, user Mr. would find a different method for the item swap glitch, where instead of the previous version, which involved overloading something called the game's sprite table, which allows for only so many objects to be shown based on the console's graphic capabilities, Mr. would instead have a Yoshi eat a power-up at the same time Mario collects it. This would allow for the same outcome, just without so much work. Some more weird side effects would be found by nathanisbored and Bahamute, but in October 2010, YouTuber WillTheBeast would make use of a coin after burning an enemy to achieve the item swap. This would be very useful, as the very next year, nathanisbored would uncover something even more bizarre. Using the item swap, Yoshi can swallow a charge and chuck. Again, these are one of those things that aren't supposed to be eaten. However, the game will still try to count him as a power-up, as he for some reason has a property known as a flag, which says he is a power-up, though because he was never programmed to be a power-up with any sort of upgrading properties, the game will attempt to load some other area of memory, what could be considered garbage data. But a person knowledgeable with this can set stuff up to tell the game not to look at the garbage data, but rather the controller registers, so data could be read from that instead. This would lead to some weird antics. Things got so weird, in fact, that soon enough, people were finding ways to use this glitch to skip straight to the end of the game. Japanese tool-assisted speedrunner Antasis, who found this credits warp, along with Tasser Masterjun, would publish their own carefully put together playthroughs with these warps, using emulator tools to slow the game down, and jump back to earlier parts of the game if they messed up. Now you might be asking, what does all this have to do with ACE? In short, these glitches would be the gateway to doing anything you want within the confines of the game and its hardware. The hacker's small bug, if you will. But this next find would ultimately seal the deal when it came to executing arbitrary code. nathanisbored would find a glitch referred to as stunning. Stunning is an in-game property that has a timer, which tells an object to do something else once the timer runs up. For example, Goombas that are knocked on their top side will be considered stunned, and once the stun timer runs up, they'll flip right back up. Now when there are objects that are stunned that aren't meant to be, it'll spawn another object, similar to how a Koopa would hop out of its shell. You see this happening with the tool-assisted speedruns done by Antasis and Masterjun, where a fish will spawn out of a P-switch that's been stunned. The stun for these switches happens as after jumping on and then eating it, when Yoshi spits it out, the moment it's supposed to disappear, it'll spawn a fish. Knowing this, Masterjun would work on the most interesting task yet. After meticulously interacting with objects, spawning multiple Yoshis, and doing all sorts of wacky things which would affect the game's sprite table in a very specific way, the game's memory would be altered so that upon stunning a flying question mark block in this underground portion of Yoshi's Island 2, Masterjun is successfully able to force the game to read the controller inputs as working code. Wait, what? If that sounds confusing, don't worry. I've been back and forth trying to understand it myself. But using these glitches, moving objects in just the right spot, and lining up the sprite table in just the right way will cause the game to behave in a way it wasn't meant to. An input on a controller, for example, will normally be read as just that, a controller input. But using the values the controller can create, and altering the game temporarily to where the instruction pointer is out of its normal place and is now reading those controller values, if done precisely to where it makes sense to the Super Nintendo, you can essentially tell the console to do whatever you want it to. For a human, this is very limiting, and most applications of this are to skip to the credits in the game. However, what if this stuff was planned ahead and performed not by a human, but a machine? Now, I'm not talking about AI or anything that crazy, but bear with me for a second. As I mentioned before, a tool-assisted speedrun is a playthrough of a game created by a human using tools built into an emulator, with the ability to slow down the game frame by frame in order to put in exactly the right inputs that they want. Now, using other external tools during this process, a person skilled in reverse engineering could figure out where in the code of the game they want to get to, doing certain actions to achieve their desired outcomes. Masterjun did this to skip to the credits at the end, the difference this time being that this task could be done on a real console, as the previous task credits warps were the result of an emulator-specific bug. However, this new method seemed to work on everything, providing they could hook up a machine to the Super Nintendo to play back their task inputs. Say hello to TaskBot. At the speedrunning convention Awesome Games Done Quick 2014, a new setup that owner Dwango AC calls TaskBot, which is essentially a small Raspberry Pi computer being held up by Rob the Robot, an original NES accessory which is merely there for aesthetic reasons, would be hooked up to a Super Nintendo, feeding controller inputs coming from a computer to the controller ports. For Super Mario World, these inputs would be created by Masterjun, and during what seems like the setup for the credits warp, the game does this instead.
Which basically means that he made it act like a Koopa shell, and then he...
You remember that thing I said about having enough time and external tools to figure out what buttons need to be pressed to make the game do whatever you want? Masterjun took that idea and cranked it up to 11. Using only inputs, he was able to feed the game some weird code, which in turn would end up programming a menu in a couple new games, all within Super Mario World. In order to do this, he needed to put in so many controller inputs to program all this, and in order to do it in a very timely manner, would need to use 8 controllers. Now this would be fine, however the SNES is limited to only 2 controller ports. However, by using a Super Multitap, an adapter made by Hudson Soft, the same people that made a lot of the Mario Party games, it would allow for up to 4 controllers to be connected. When using 2 of these, that doubles the available controller ports to 8, which would leave enough space for the 8 connections connected to a computer to send out the pre-made inputs. At the time, this was amazing. Even to this day, it doesn't fail to leave people in awe and simultaneous confusion. This appearance made it so that every time you'd see another appearance from TaskBot, you knew you were going to be in for a good time. At the next year's AGDQ, Dwango AC showed off another Super Mario World task, with the task inputs this time having been done by both Masterjun and P4Plus2, a talented programmer. The setup would be different, however, after more ridiculously fast and meticulously planned inputs were run, the game switched to the original Super Mario Bros. For the NES. It was slightly off, as it contained a few graphical bugs and some Super Nintendo-style sounds and music akin to that of Super Mario Bros. From the Super Mario All-Stars collection. It seemed like the limit to which you could do things was never-ending. Over time, though, more games would see their own breakthroughs in Ace. One of the more prominent examples of this would be in The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. Now, with this being a 3D game, there was a lot more to worry about, compared to something like an internal table in the system's memory, which could only hold a certain amount of 2D sprites. With the N64, you had a 3D environment and 360 degrees of movement, along with a more advanced console able to process more data. How much longer would it have to take to figure something out on a bigger playing field like this? Well, it would start with a glitch known as stale reference manipulation. In October 2019, YouTuber Glitchesandstuff would post some videos about a new trick that was coined stale reference manipulation, or SRM for short. It would involve either latching onto an item with a boomerang, or even picking up an object while loading into another room. When Link carries an object, or the boomerang latches onto an item, in the game's memory, either of them will point to the area in memory where the holdable object or item is located. Going into another room while not holding the object would unload it from the game's memory. And when holding it while moving to another room, some special code will be run to tell the object not to unload. But by having the item unload while it's connected to a boomerang or being picked up by Link, then Link or the boomerang would point to that same area of memory as it was while you were grasping it, but this time with the objects that are present in the other room. Whatever object would be in that area of memory now would be the item you're holding, causing some rather humorous effects, such as Link's sudden feat of strength by holding up a giant metal door. This would soon prompt glitch hunter and YouTuber MrCheeze, along with help from Thero, Jolin012, and NatalyaHasDied, to put their heads together and come up with what would soon be one of the next biggest ways to beat the game not long after starting: a credits warp. This could be done by humans, though a second controller with specific inputs would need to be set prior to playing the game. Before starting the playthrough, you'd also have to play on the Japanese 1.0 version of the game, using a very odd looking file name which would be specific to some code you'd force the game to run later on. After starting the game, this credits warp would be done by first acquiring some items and unlocking the next section of the first area in the game, the Kokiri Forest. This would open up what would be a new room, which could allow for the SRM glitch to take place. After collecting a slingshot from within the forest's first dungeon, the Great Deku Tree, you'll head back to the forest, to the area where these two rooms meet. Walking back and forth, loading between these two rooms to set up memory in a specific way, while precisely using the sword and slingshot to set up even more memory values, you could then use a glitch known as walking while talking, so that the camera warps to the last thing you were targeting upon performing an action, such as slashing a rock. Because the camera is far away enough, the rocks will still be loaded, but they'll become inactive. That is, it wouldn't run the same code that an active rock would, but it wouldn't be unloaded from memory either. And when grabbing this specific rock at just the right time, you'll grab onto it while it becomes inactive. Because Link picked up the rock when it became inactive, the moment you load into the other room of the forest, that rock won't be able to run its normal code, the code stating that it shouldn't become unloaded when you change a room. Thus, because that code was never run, the rock will then become unloaded, allowing Link to point to something else. The entire time you're holding on to a normal object you can pick up, some values for that object's position and rotation will be constantly set, so that it appears it's moving with you in whatever direction you're facing. But in the case of this unloaded rock, because the rock is nowhere to be found, the rotation values will still be written to something else. In this case, it'll write to the function pointer in the game that normally dictates what code needs to be run to make this other completely different rock visible every frame, or in technical terms, to make the rock be drawn every frame. It's these values written to the wrong portion of memory which opens the door to a whole bunch of shenanigans. along with another previous instance of using the slingshot pointed at a very precise angle. This will tell the game to read the file name set earlier as code. What this code will do, which is run by making this other rock, whose values we ended up changing with the previous unloaded rock setup, appear visible on screen by being close enough to it, in coordination with precise inputs from both controllers and the specific file name that the game will look at and interpret as code, would ultimately start the endgame credits cutscene, though this would cause Link to fall out of bounds. After the game resets the level, as it notices Link is too far out of bounds, it would go on to play the rest of the game's credits. Even through this lengthy process, more improvements would be made to this method, which as of today, wouldn't even involve executing arbitrary code at all. One of the only other categories in the game to use ACE would be 100% no source requirements, which would make use of a second file name mid-run to unlock the file name character limit, so they could write with the virtual keyboard whatever code they wanted. This would grant them access to a debug menu so they could collect everything in the game and beat it in under 7 minutes. But there'd be one more big thing the people who make tasks for Ocarina of Time would have up their sleeve. After a slightly different route, an altered setup for ACE, and a bunch of pre-made inputs, the game would read the values for the controller inputs as code once again. However, this time, what would be happening would be a bit more complicated than just doing stuff within the confines of the game. It would still be done on an original, unmodified copy of the game, but this next series of inputs would write a program, which would write a program, which would end up writing a chain of 2 other programs, allowing for a lot of data to pass through quickly, so something of a much larger scale could take place. Using unused content left over in the game, along with some custom text, music, sound effects, etc., Soren, along with a team of many talented individuals, would create a new storyline in the game, ultimately leading up to the collection of the Triforce, an item which never gets collected in this traditional sense for these 3D Zelda games. And finally, with a connection to a computer, they were able to upload custom files in real time to run on an original unmodified Nintendo 64, on an original unmodified copy of Ocarina of Time. This showed a glimpse of Link and Zelda's future, with custom modern-day Zelda character models, complete with voice acting by fans, and finally, an appearance of people from the Twitch chat who were watching at home, having their messages appear in the sky. The fact that people over the years combined their knowledge and expertise to help create something new within devices that are normally very limited is beyond amazing. It can be very hard to understand, but I hope this video will help anyone appreciate everything that these communities for different games were able to do, if only for our entertainment. I'd like to give a special shout out to MrCheeze and P4Plus2 for their help with reviewing the script for this video. A lot of this stuff was difficult to understand, so big ups to them for helping me learn some of these finer details. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, share your thoughts in the comments below. But with that being said, thank you for watching, and until next time, take care and peace.